Offer it in Ilion, he told them. What did Helena say? Or Altara. He did like her, but he liked Min as much, or thought he did. It was impossible to sort out his feelings for either of them. You have ships for the sea as well as river boats and barges, and if you don't have enough, hire them from Mayenne. He liked both women, but beyond that, he'd spent very nearly his whole life mooning after Egwene. He was not about to dive into that again until he was sure. Sure of something. Sure. If dealings with the territory of Mayenne was to be believed, stop this, he told himself. Keep your mind on these weasels, or they'll find cracks to slip through.
Hey, Tony Lee, how you doing, bro? Appreciate you stopping by.
I'm sure the first will be amenable for a good price, and maybe a signed agreement, a treaty. That was a good word, the sort they used. Pledging to leave Mayenne alone in return for ships. He owed her that.
How you doing tonight, Tony?
My Lord Dragon. They are vultures and scum. Tadosian sounded scandalized, and so did Mylon when he said, "We have always dealt with Mayenne from strength, my Lord Dragon, never with bent knee." Rand took a deep breath. The High Lords tensed. It always came to this. He always tried to reason with them, and it always failed. Tom said the High Lords had heads as hard as the stone, and he was right. What do I feel for her? Dreaming about her? She's certainly pretty. He was not sure if he meant Elaine or Min. Stop this. A kiss.
Hell yeah, totally.
Kiss. Stop.
That's badass.
Putting women firmly out of his head, he set himself to telling these stone-brained fools what they were going to do. First, you will cut taxes on farmers by 3/4, and on everyone else by half. Don't argue. Just do it. Second, you go to Berlane and ask her price for
her. Right. That'd be badass when he passed it, bro.
With false smiles and grinding teeth. But they listened.
But to do a dab out of this one.
Egwene was considering Joya and Anika when Mat fell in beside her, just walking down the hallway as if he merely happened to be going the same way. He was frowning to himself, and his hair needed brushing, as if he had been scrubbing his fingers through it. Once or twice he glanced at her, but did not speak. The servants they passed bowed or curtsied, and so did the occasional High Lords and ladies, if with markedly less enthusiasm. Mat's lip-curling stares at the nobles would have brought trouble if she had not been there, friend of the Lord Dragon or not. This silence was not like him, not like the Mat she knew. Except for his fine red coat, wrinkled as if he had slept in it, he seemed no different than the old Mat. Yet they were surely all different men. His quiet was unsettling. "Is last night troubling you?" she asked at last. "You know about that? Well, you would, wouldn't you? Doesn't bother me. Wasn't much to it. Over and done with now, anyway." She pretended to believe him. "Nynaeve and I do not see much of you." That was a rank understatement. "I've been busy," he muttered with an uncomfortable shrug, looking everywhere but at her again. Static Egwene, and apparently thinking she was not looking, winked at Mat. "I've been busy playing cards." Egwene's eyebrows rose sharply. That woman had to be 10 years older than Nynaeve. "I see. It must use up a great deal of time, playing cards. Too much to spare a few moments for old friends." "The last time I spared you a moment, you and Nynaeve tied me up with the power like a pig for market, so you could rummage through my room. Friends don't steal from friends. Besides, you're always with that Elaine, or Moiraine." Clearing his throat, he shot her a sideways glance. "I don't like taking up your time. You are busy, from what I hear. Questioning dark friends. Doing all sorts of important things, I should imagine. You know these Tyrants think you are Aes Sedai, don't you? She shook her head ruefully. It was Aes Sedai he did not like. However much of the world Matt saw, nothing would ever change him. It is not stealing to take back what was supposed to be a loan, she told him. I don't remember you saying anything about a loan. What use do I have from the Amerlin? Just get me in trouble. You could have asked, though. She refrained from asked. She wanted neither or a sulky departure. This time she would let him get away with his version. Well, I'm glad you are still willing to talk to me. Was there a special reason for it?
And that's why I like doing
He
cold
shoved
starts.
his fingers through his hair and muttered to
Heat it
himself.
up so you can
What
milk
he
it down a
needed
little
was his
bit.
mother to haul him off by his ear for a long talking to. Egwene counseled herself to patience. She could be
Oh,
patient
shit.
when she wanted to. She would
Our
not
dabs
hurt before he did, if she
are
burst.
definitely on another level.
The corridor opened into a railed colonnade of white marble, looking down on one of the stone's few gardens. Large white blossoms covered a few small waxy
Definitely got to
berries,
have the
and
tolerance
gave a
for it
scent
because they're
even
definitely
sweeter than the banks of red and
it'll
yellow
do its
roses.
job faster
The
than
sullen breeze failed to
smoking
stir the
a
hangings on the
joint or
inner
a couple
wall,
bowls.
but it did cut the morning's growing damp warmth. Matt took a seat on the wide balustrade with his back against the column and one foot up in front of him. Peering down into the garden, he finally said,
Yeah, it's because it's a lot more strong.
He wanted advice from her? She goggled at him. Whatever I can do to help, she said faintly. He turned his head to her, and she did her best to assume something like I don't know. It was a 10-minute walk to the garden. Besides, there were men down there weeding among the roses. If she pushed him over, he might land on one. A gardener, not a rose bush. How am I supposed to advise you, then? She asked in a thin voice. I am trying to decide what to do. He looked embarrassed. He had a right to, in her opinion. I hope you are not thinking of trying to leave. You know how important you are. You cannot run away from it, Matt. You think I don't know that? I don't think I could leave if Moiraine told me I could. Believe me, Egwene, I'm not going anywhere. I just want to know what's going to happen. He gave a rough shake of his head, and his voice grew tenor. What comes next? What did you do? There are children. They don't exist as a Why do I find myself spouting gibberish? But it's goose gabble. I want to know, Egwene. I want to know before I go as crazy as Rand. Rand is not crazy, she said automatically. So Matt was not trying to run away. It was a pleasant surprise. He had not seen the responsibility, but there was pain and worry in his voice. Matt never worried, or never let anyone see it if he did. I do not know the answers, Matt, she said gently. Perhaps Moiraine. No! He was on his feet in a bound. No, Aes Sedai. I mean, you're different. I know you, and you aren't. Didn't they teach you anything in the tower? Some trick or other, something that would serve? Oh, Matt, I am sorry. I am so sorry. His laugh reminded her of their childhood. Just so he had always laughed when his grandest expectations went astray. Ah, well, I guess it'd still be at second hand. No offense to you. Just so he had moaned over a splinter in his finger and treated a broken leg as if it were nothing at all. There might be a way, she said slowly. If Moiraine says it is all right, she might. Moiraine? Haven't you heard a word I said? The last thing I want is Moiraine meddling. What way? Matt had always been rash, but he wanted no more than she did to know. If only he showed a little sense and caution for once. A passing Tyran noblewoman with dark braids coiled about her head, shoulders bare above yellow linen, bent her knee slightly, looking at them with no expression. She walked on quickly, with a stiff back. Egwene watched her until she was well beyond earshot and they were alone. unless the gardeners 30 feet below counted. Matt was staring at her expectantly. In the end, she told him of the ter'angreal, the twisted doorway that held answers on its other side. It was the dangers, she emphasized, the consequences of foolish questions, or those touching the shadow, the dangers even Aes Sedai might not know. She was more than flattered that he had come to her, but he had to show a little sense. You must remember this, Matt. Frivolous questions can get you killed, so if you do use it, you will have to be serious for a change, and you mustn't ask any questions that touch the shadow. He had listened with greater and greater incredulity. When she was done, he exclaimed, 3 questions? You go in like Billy, I suppose, spend a night and come out 10 years later with a purse that's always full of gold and a... For once in your life, Matrim Cawthon, she snapped, do not talk like a fool. You know very well ter'angreal are not stories. It's dangers you have to be aware of. Maybe the answers you seek are inside this one, but you must not try it before Moiraine says you can. You must promise me on that, or I promise you I will take you to her like a trout on a string. You know I can. He gave a loud snort. I'd be a fool if I did try it, no matter what Moiraine says. Walk into a bloody ter'angreal? It's less I want to do with the bloody power, not more. You can blot it right out of your mind. It is the only chance I know, Matt. Not for me it isn't, he said firmly. No chance at all is better than that. Despite his tone, she wanted to put an arm around him. Only he would likely make some joke at her expense and try to goose her. He had been incorrigible from the day he was born. But he had come to her for help. I'm sorry, Matt. What will you do? Oh, I suppose. If anyone will play with me, play stones with Tom, dice in the taverns, I can still go as far as the city at least. His gaze strayed toward a passing maidservant, a slender, dark-eyed girl near his own age. I'll find something to take up time. Her hand itched to slap him, but instead she said cautiously, Matt, you really aren't thinking of leaving, are you? Would you tell Moiraine if I was? He put up his hands to forestall her. Well, there's no need. I told you I wouldn't. I'll not pretend I'd not like to, but I won't. Is that good enough for you? A pensive frown crept onto his face. Egwene, do you ever wish you were back home? That none of this had ever happened? It was a startling question, coming from him, but she knew her answer. No. Even with everything. No. Do you? I would be a fool then, wouldn't I? He laughed. It's cities I like, and this one will do for now. This one will do. Egwene, you won't tell Moiraine about this, will you? About me asking for advice and all? Why shouldn't I? She asked suspiciously. He was Matt, after all. He gave an embarrassed hitch of his shoulders. I've been keeping wider of her than I have of... Anyway, I've been staying clear, especially when she...
Hey, Ozark, how you doing, bro?
She might think
Hope you're doing well.
You won't tell her, will you? I won't, she said. If you promise me you will not go near that ter'angreal without asking her permission. I shouldn't even have told you about it. I promise, he grinned. I won't go near that thing unless my life depends upon it. I swear. He finished with mock solemnity.
How's your night going, Ozark?
Egwene shook her head. However much everything else changed, Matt just never would.
Chapter 9. Decisions. 3 days passed with heat and damp that seemed to sap even the Tyrant's strength. The city slowed to a lethargic walk, the stone to a crawl. Servants worked nearly in their sleep, and the Majera tore her coiled braids in frustration. But even she could not find the energy to rap knuckles or flick ears with a hard finger. Defenders of the stone slumped at their posts like half-melted candles, and the officers showed more interest in chilled wine than in making their rounds. The High Lords kept largely to their apartments, sleeping through the hottest part of the day, and a few left the stone entirely for the relative cool of estates far to the east on the slopes of the spine of the world. Oddly, only the Outlanders, who felt the heat worst of all, pushed on with their lives as hard as ever, if not harder. For them, the heavy heat did not weigh nearly as much as did the hours rushing by. Matt quickly discovered that he had been right about the young lords who saw the playing cards try to kill him. Not only did they avoid him, they spread the word among their friends, often garbled. No one in the stone who had 2 pieces of silver in hand would say more than hasty excuses while backing away. The rumors spread beyond the lordlings. More than one serving woman who had enjoyed a cuddle now declined too, and 2 said uneasily that they had heard it was dangerous to be alone with him. Perrin appeared all wrapped up in his own worries, and Tom seemed to vanish by sleight of hand. Matt had no idea what occupied the Gleeman, but he was seldom to be found, day or night. Moraine, the one person Matt wished would ignore him, instead seemed to be there whenever he turned around. She was just passing by or crossing the corridor in the distance, but her eyes met his every last time, looking as if she knew what he was thinking and what he wanted. Knew how she was going to make him do exactly what she wanted instead. None of it made any difference in one respect. He still managed to find excuses to put off leaving for another day. As he saw it, he had not promised Egwene he would stay, but he did. Once, he carried a lamp down into the belly of the stone to the so-called Great Holding, as far as the dry-rotted door at the far end of the narrow hallway. A few minutes of peering into the shadowy interior at dim shapes covered with dusty canvas, roughly stacked crates and barrels, their flat ends used as shelves for jumbles of figurines and carvings and peculiar things of crystal and glass and metal. A few minutes of that, and he hurried away muttering, "I'd have to be the biggest bloody fool in the whole bloody world." Nothing kept him from going into the city, though, and there was no chance at all meeting Moraine in the dockside taverns of the Mola, the port district, or the inns in the Chulm, where the warehouses were, dimly lit, cramped, often dirty, places of cheap wine, bad ale, occasional fights, and unending dice games. The stakes in the dice games were small compared to what he had grown used to, but that was not why he always found himself back in the stone after a few hours. He tried not to think about what always drew him back, near Tyrande. Perrin sometimes saw Matt in the waterfront taverns, drinking too much cheap wine, dicing as if he did not care whether he won or lost, once flashing a knife when a burly shipman pressed him on how often he did win. It was not like Matt to be so irritable, but Perrin avoided him instead of trying to find out what was troubling him. Perrin was not there for wine or dice, and the men who thought of fighting changed their minds after a good look at his shoulders and his eyes. He bought bad ale, though, for sailors in wide leather trousers and for under-merchants with thin silver chains across their coat fronts, for any man who looked to be from a distant land. It was rumor he hunted, word of something that might draw Faile away from Tyr. He was sure if he found an adventure for her, something that smacked of a chance at putting her name in the stories, she would go. She pretended to understand why he had to stay, but occasionally she still hinted that she wanted to leave and hoped he would go with her. He was certain the right bait would pull her, without him. Most rumors she would know for outdated twistings of the truth, just as he did. The war that burned along the Arath Ocean was said to be the work of a people no one had ever heard of before, called the Sawchin, or something like it. He heard many variations from many tellers, a strange folk who might be Arthur Hawkwing's armies come back after 1,000 years. One fellow, a Tarabonner, in a round red hat and a mustache as thick as a bull's horns, solemnly informed him that Hawkwing himself led these people, his legendary sword Justice in hand. There were rumors that the fabled Horn of Valere, meant to call dead heroes from the grave to fight in the last battle, had been found. In Gildan, riots had broken out all over the country. Ilion was suffering from outbreaks of massive madness. In Cairhien, famine was slowing the killing. Someplace in the borderlands, Trolloc raids were on the increase. Perrin could not send Faile into any of that, not even to get her away from Tyr. Reports of trouble in Saldaia seemed promising. Her own home must be attractive to her, and he had heard that Mazrim Taim, the false dragon, was safely in Aes Sedai hands. But no one knew what sort of trouble. Making something up would do no good. Whatever he found, she would surely ask her own questions before chasing after it. Besides, any turmoil in Saldea might easily be as bad as the other things he heard. He could not tell her where he was spending his time either, because she would inevitably ask why. She knew he was not Matt, to enjoy lolling about taverns. He had never been good at lying, so he put her off as best he could. She began to give him long, silent, slanted looks. All he could do was redouble his efforts to find a tale to lure her away. He had to send her away from him before he got her killed. He had to.
Egwene and Nynaeve spent more hours with Joya and Amico to no avail. Their stories never wavered. Over Nynaeve's protests, Egwene even tried telling each of them what the other had said to see if anything joggled loose. Amico stared at them, whining that she had never heard any such plan. But it might be true, she added. It might. She sweated with eagerness to please. Joya coolly told them to go to Tanchico if they wished. It is an uncomfortable city now, I hear, she said smoothly, raven eyes glittering. The king holds little more than the city itself, and I understand the Panarch has ceased keeping civil order. Strong arms and quick knives rule Tanchico. But go, if it pleases you. No word came from Tar Valon, nothing to say if the Amyrlin was dealing with the possible threat of free Musrim time. There had been plenty of time for a message to come, by quick riverboat or man horses, since Moiraine had sent the pigeons, provided she had sent them. Egwene and Nynaeve argued about that. Nynaeve admitted the Aes Sedai could not lie, but she tried to find some twist in Moiraine's words. Moiraine did not seem to fret over the lack of response from the Amyrlin, though it was hard to tell through her crystal calm. Egwene did fret over it, and over whether Tanchico was a false trail or a real one or a trap. The Stone's library held books about Tarabon and Tanchico, but though she read until her eyes ached, she found no clue to anything dangerous to Rand. Heat and worry did nothing for her temper. She was sometimes as snappish as Nynaeve. Some things were going well, of course. Matt was still in the Stone. Obviously, he really was growing up and learning about responsibility. She regretted failing him, but she was not certain any woman in the tower could have done more. She understood his thirst to know because she thirsted too, although for other knowledge, for the things she could only learn in the tower, the things she might discover that no one else had known how to do before, the lost things she might relearn. Aviendha began to visit with Egwene, apparently of her own choice. If the woman was wary at first, well, she was Aiel after all, and she did think Egwene was full Aes Sedai. Still, her company was enjoyable, although Egwene sometimes thought she saw unasked questions in her eyes. If Aviendha kept her reserve, it soon became apparent that she had a quick wit and a sense of humor akin to Egwene's. They sometimes ended up giggling together like girls. Aiel ways were nothing Egwene was used to, though, such as Aviendha's discomfort at sitting in a chair, and her shock at finding Egwene in her bath, a silver-plated tub the Majira had brought up. Not shock at walking in on her naked. In fact, when she saw that Egwene was uncomfortable, she peeled off her own clothes and sat down on the floor to talk. But at seeing Egwene sitting chest-deep in water, it was dirtying so much water that made her eyes pop. For another thing, Aviendha refused to understand why she and Elaine had not done something drastic to Berelain since they wanted her out of the way. It was all but forbidden for a warrior to kill a woman not wed to the spear. But since neither Elaine nor Berelain were maidens of the spear, it was apparently quite all right, in Aviendha's view, for Elaine to challenge the first of Mayenne to fight with knives, or failing that, with fists and feet. Knives were best, as she saw it. Berelain looked the sort of woman who could be beaten several times without giving up. Best simply to challenge and kill her. Or Egwene could do it for her, as friend and near sister. Even with that, it was a pleasure to have someone to talk and laugh with. Elaine was occupied most of the time, of course, and Nynaeve, seeming to feel the rush of time as keenly as Egwene, gave her free moments over to moonlit walks on the battlements with Lan, and to preparing foods the warder liked with her own hands, curses that sometimes drove the cooks from the kitchen, Nynaeve did not know very much about cooking. If not for Avienda, Egwene was not sure what she would have done in the muggy hours between questionings of the Dark Friends, sweated undoubtedly, and worried that she might have to do something that gave her nightmares thinking of it. By agreement, Elaine was never present at those questionings. One more set of ears listening would make no difference. Instead, whenever Rand had a moment to spare, the daughter heir just happened to be close by, to talk, or simply walk holding his arm, even if it was only from a meeting with some high lords to a room where others waited, or to a lightning inspection of the defenders' quarters. She became quite good at finding secluded corners where the two of them could pause, alone. Of course, he always had Aiel trailing after him, but she soon cared as little for what they thought as for what her mother would. She even entered a sort of conspiracy with the Maidens of the Spear. They seemed to know every hidden nook in the stone, and they let her know whenever Rand was alone. They seemed to think the game great sport. The surprise was that he asked her about the governing of nations, and listened to what she said. That she wished her mother could see. More than once, Morghese had laughed, half despairingly, and told her she had to learn to concentrate. Which crafts to protect and how, and which not and why, might be dry decisions, but as important as how to care for the sick. It might be fun to guide a stubborn lord or merchant into doing what he did not want to while thinking it was his own idea. It might be warming to feed the hungry. But if the hungry were to be fed, it was necessary to decide how many clerks and drivers and wagons were needed. Others might arrange it, but then you would never know until it was too late whether they had made a mistake. He listened to her and often took her advice. She thought she could have loved him for those two things alone. Berelain was not setting foot outside her chambers. Rand had begun smiling as soon as he saw her. Nothing could be finer about the world, unless the days could stop passing. 3 short days, slipping away like water through her fingers. Joya and Amika would be sent north, and the reason for staying in Tyr would vanish. It would be time for her and Egwene and Nynaeve to leave, too. She would go, when that time came. She had never considered not. Knowing that made her proud of behaving like a woman, not a girl. Knowing it made her want to cry.
And Rand? He met with high lords in his chambers and issued orders. He startled them by appearing at secret gatherings of 3 or 4 that Tom had ferreted out, just to reiterate some point from his last commands. They smiled and bowed and sweated and wondered how much he knew. A use had to be found for their energy before one of them decided that if Rand could not be manipulated, he must be killed. Whatever it took to divert them, he would not start a war. If he had to confront Samael, so be it. But he would not start a war. Forming a plan of action occupied most of his time, not given over to hounding the High Lords. Bits and pieces came from the books he had the librarians bring to his rooms by armloads, and from his talks with Elaine. Her advice was certainly useful with the High Lords. He could see them hastily reassessing him when he displayed knowledge of things they themselves only half knew. She stopped him when he wanted to give her the credit. A wise ruler takes advice, she told him, smiling, but should never be seen to take it. Let them think you know more than you do. It will not harm them, and it will help you. She seemed pleased he had suggested it, though. He was not entirely sure that he was not still putting off some decision, at least because of her. 3 days of planning, of trying to puzzle out what was still missing. Something was. He could not react to the Forsaken. He had to make them react to him. 3 days, and on the 4th, she would go. Back to Tar Valon, he hoped. But once he moved, he suspected even their brief moments together would end. 3 days of stolen kisses when he could forget he was anything but a man with his arms around a woman. He knew it for a foolish reason, if true. He was relieved she did not seem to want more than his company. But in those moments alone, he could forget decisions, forget the fate awaiting the Dragon Reborn. More than once he considered asking her to stay. But it would not be fair to raise her expectations when he had no idea what he wanted from her beyond her presence. If she had any expectations, of course. Much better just to think of them as a man and a young woman walking out together of a feast day evening. That became easier. Sometimes he forgot she was the daughter heir, and he a shepherd. But he wished she were not going. 3 days. He had to decide. He had to move. In a direction no one expected. The sun slid slowly toward the horizon on the evening of the third day. The half-drawn draperies of Rand's bedchamber lessened the reddish-yellow glare. Kalendor glittered on its ornate stand like the purest crystal. Rand stared at Mylon and Sunamon, then tossed the thick bundle of large vellum sheets at them. A treaty all neatly scribed, lacking only signatures and seals. It hit Mylon in the chest, and he caught it by reflex. He bowed as if honored, but his tight smile revealed clenched teeth. Sunamon shifted from foot to foot, dry-washing his hands. "All is as you said, my Lord Dragon," he said anxiously. "Grain for ships." "And 2,000 Tyrant levies," Rand cut him off. "To see to proper distribution of grain and protect Tyrant interests." His voice was like ice, but his stomach seemed to be boiling. He nearly shook with the desire to pound at these fools with his fists. 2,000 men, under the command of Torian. "The High Lord Torian has an interest in affairs with me and my Lord Dragon," Mylon said smoothly. "He has an interest in forcing his attentions on a woman who won't look at him," Rand shouted. "Grain for ships, I said. No soldiers. And certainly no bloody Torian. Have you even spoken to Berlang?" They blinked at him, as if they did not understand the words. It was too much. He snatched at Saidin. The vellum in Mylon's arms erupted into flame. With a yell, Mylon hurled the fiery bundle into the bare fireplace and hurriedly brushed its sparks and scorch marks on his red silk coat. Sunamon stared at the burning sheets, which were crackling and turning black, with his mouth hanging open. "You will go to Berlang," he told them, surprised at how calm his voice was. "By tomorrow midday, you will have offered me what I want, or by sunset tomorrow, I'll hang both of you. If I have to hang High Lords every day, 2 by 2, I will. I will send every last one of you to the gallows if you won't obey me. Now get out of my sight." The quiet tone seemed to affect them more than his shouting had. Even Mylon looked uneasy as they backed away, bowing at every other step, murmuring protestations of undying loyalty and everlasting obedience. It sickened him. "Get out!" he roared. And they abandoned dignity, almost fighting with one another, to pull the doors open. They ran. One of the Aiel guards put his head in for a moment to see that Rand was all right, before drawing the door shut. Rand trembled openly. They disgusted him almost as much as he disgusted himself, threatening to hang men because they did not do as he told them. Worse, meaning it. He could remember when he did not have a temper, or at least when he rarely had, and had managed to keep it on a short rein. He crossed the room toward Kalendor, sparkled with the light streaming in between the draperies. The blade looked like the finest glass, absolutely clear. It felt like steel to his fingers, sharp as a razor.
Hey, OG, how you doing,
He
bro?
had come close to reaching for it to deal with Mylon and Sunamon.
Hope you're doing
Whether
well.
to use it as a sword or for its real purpose, he did not know. Either possibility horrified him. "I'm not mad yet, only angry. Like, so angry. Tomorrow, the Dark Friends would be put on a ship tomorrow. Elaine would be leaving. And Egwene and Nynaeve, of course.
Hell yeah, OG.
Back to Tarvalin, he prayed. Black Hawk
I'm about to
saw no
smoke
back
a
to the White Tower had to be as safe a place as there was now.
little bit of a bull.
Tomorrow.
Then probably call it the
No more
night.
excuses to put off what he had to do. Not after tomorrow. He turned his hands over, looking at the heron branded into each palm. He had examined them so often that he could have sketched every line perfectly from memory. The prophecies foretold them. Twice and twice shall he be marked, twice to live and twice to die. Once the heron to set his path, twice the heron to name him true. Once the dragon for remembrance lost.
Oh yeah.
Twice the dragon.
I did a dab earlier on my Cheech and Chong
But if the herons
dab
proved
rig.
him true, what need for dragons? For that matter, what was a dragon? The only dragon he had ever heard of was Lews Therin Telemon. Lews Therin Kinslayer had been the dragon. The dragon was the Kinslayer. Except now it was himself. But he could not be marked with himself. Perhaps the figure on the banner was a dragon. Not even Aes Sedai seemed to know what that creature was. You have changed from when I last saw you. Stronger. Harder. He spun, gaping at the young woman standing by the door, fair of skin and dark of hair and eye. Tall, dressed all in white and silver, she arched an eyebrow at the half-melted lumps of gold and silver over the fireplace. He had left them there to remind him of what could happen when he acted without thinking, when he lost control. Much good it had done. Selene, he gasped, hurrying to her. Where did you come from? How did you get here? I thought you must still be in Cairhien, or... Looking down at her, he did not want to say he feared she might be dead, or a starving refugee. A woven silver belt glittered around her narrow waist. Silver combs, worked with stars and crescent moons, shone in hair that fell to her shoulders like waterfalls of night. She was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Elaine and Egwene were only pretty beside her. For some reason, though, she did not affect him the way she had. Perhaps it was the long months since he had last seen her, in a Cairhien not yet racked by civil war. Not where I wish to be. She frowned at his face. You have been marked, but no matter. You were mine, and you are mine. Any other is no more than a caretaker whose time has passed. I will lay claim to what is mine openly now. He stared at her. Marked? Did she mean his hands? And what did she mean he was hers? Selene, he said gently, we had pleasant days together, and hard days. I'll never forget your courage or your help. But there was never more between us than companionship. We traveled together, but that was the end of it. You will stay here in the stone, in the best apartments, and when peace returns to Cairhien, I will see that your estates there are returned to you, if I can. You have been marked. He smiled wryly. Estates in Cairhien. I may have had estates in those lands once. The land has changed so much that nothing is as it was. Selene is only a name I sometimes use. Lews Therin. The name I made my own is Lanfear. Rand barked a shallow laugh. A poor joke, Selene. I'd as soon make jest about the Dark One as one of the Forsaken. And my name is Rand. We call ourselves the Chosen, she said calmly. Chosen to rule the world forever. We will live forever. You can also. He frowned at her worriedly. She actually thought she was... Her travails in reaching Tyr must have unhinged her. But she did not look mad. She was calm, cool, certain. Without thinking, he found himself reaching for saidin. He reached for it, and struck a wall he could not see or feel, except that it kept him from the source. You can't be, she smiled. Light, he breathed. You are one of them. Slowly, he backed away. If he reached Kalandor, at least he would have a weapon. Perhaps it could not work as an Ongrial, but it would do for a sword. Would he use a sword against a woman? Against Selene? No, against Lanfear. Against one of the Forsaken. His back came up hard against something, and he looked around to see what it was. There was nothing there. A wall of nothing with his back pressed against it. Kalandor glittered not 3 paces away, on the other side. He thumped a fist against the barrier in frustration. It was as unyielding as rock. I cannot trust you fully, Lews Therin. Not yet. She came closer, and he considered simply seizing her. He was bigger and stronger by far, and blocked as he was, she could wrap him up with the power like a kitten tangled in a ball of string. Not with that, certainly, she added, grimacing at Collindor. There are only two more powerful that a man can use. One, at least, I know still exists. No, Lews Therin, I will not trust you yet with that. Stop calling me that, he growled. My name is Rand. Rand al'Thor. You are Lews Therin Telamon. Oh, physically, nothing is the same except your height. But I would know who was behind those eyes, even if I'd found you in your cradle. She laughed suddenly. How much easier everything would be if I had found you then. If I had been free to. Laughter faded into an angry stare. Do you wish to see my true appearance? You can't remember that either, can you? He tried to say no, but his tongue would not work. Once he had seen two of the Forsaken together, Agenor and Balthamel. The first two loosed after 3,000 years, trapped just beneath the seal in the Dark One's prison. The one had been more withered than anything could be and still live. The other hid his face behind a mask. Hid every bit of his flesh as though he could not bear to see it or have it seen. The air rippled around Lanfear, and she changed. She was older than he, certainly. But older was not the right word. More mature. Riper. Even more beautiful, if that was possible. A lush blossom in full flower compared to a bud. Even knowing what she was, she made his mouth go dry, his throat tighten. Her dark eyes examined his face, full of confidence, yet with a hint of questioning, as if wondering what he saw. Whatever she perceived seemed to satisfy her. She smiled again. I was buried deeply in a dreamless sleep where time did not flow. The turnings of the wheel passed me by. Now you see me as I am, and I have you in my hands. She drew a fingernail along his jaw, hard enough to make him flinch. The time for games and subterfuge is past, Lews Therin. Long past. His stomach lurched. Do you mean to kill me, then? The light burn you, I... Kill you? She spat incredulously. Kill you? I mean to have you forever. You were mine long before that pale-haired milksop stole you. Before she ever saw you. You loved me. And you loved power. For a moment he felt dazed. The words sounded true. He knew they were true. But where had they come from? Selene, Lanfear, seemed as startled as he, but she recovered quickly. You've learned much. You have done much I'd not have believed you could, unaided. But you are still fumbling your way through a maze in the dark. And your ignorance may kill you. Some of the others fear you too much to wait. Samael, Ravine, Moghedien. Others, perhaps, but those of a certainty. They will come after you. They will not try to turn your heart. They will come at you by stealth, destroy you while you sleep, because of their fear. But there are those who could teach you, show you what you once knew. None would dare oppose you then. Teach me? You want me to let one of the Forsaken teach me? One of the Forsaken. A male Forsaken. A man who had been Aes Sedai in the Age of Legends, who knew the ways of channeling, knew how to avoid the pitfalls, knew... As much had been offered him before. No. Even if it is offered, I'd refuse, and why should it be? I oppose them, and you. I hate everything you've done, everything you stand for. Fool, he thought. Trapped here, and I spout defiance like some idiot in a story who never suspects he might make his captor angry enough to do something about it. But he could not force himself to take the words back. Stubbornly, he plowed ahead and made it worse. I'll destroy you if I can. You and the Dark One, and every last Forsaken. A dangerous gleam flashed in her eyes and was gone. Do you know why some of us fear you? Do you have any idea? Because they are afraid the great Lord of the Dark will give you a place above them, Rand surprised himself by managing a laugh. Great Lord of the Dark. Can't you say his true name either? Surely you don't fear to attract his attention as decent people do, or do you? It would be blasphemy, she said simply. They are right to be afraid. Samael and the rest. The great Lord does want you. He wants to exalt you above all other men. He told me. That's ridiculous. The Dark One is still bound in Shale Ghul, or I would be fighting Tarman Gaden right now. And if he knows I exist, he'd want me dead. I mean to fight him. Oh, he knows. The great Lord knows more than you would suspect. It is possible to talk with him. Into Shale Ghul, into the pit of doom. Hear him. Different light shone on her face. Ecstasy. She breathed through parted lips, and for a moment seemed to stare at something distant and wondrous. Words cannot even begin to describe it. You must experience it to know. You must. She was seeing his face again, with eyes large and dark and insistent. Kneel to the great Lord, and he will set you above all others. He will leave you free to reign as you will, so long as you bend knee to him only once, to acknowledge him. No more than that. He told me this. Asmodean will teach you to wield the power without it killing you. Teach you what you can do with it. Let me help you. We can destroy the others. The great Lord will not care. We can destroy all of them. Even Asmodean, once he has taught you all you need to know. You and I can rule the world together under the great Lord forever. Her voice dropped to a whisper, equal parts eagerness and fear. Two great Sa'angreal were made just before the end. One that you can use, one that I can. Far greater than the sword. Their power is beyond imagining. With those, we could even challenge the great Lord himself. Even the Creator.
Excuse me.
You are mad, he said raggedly. The father of lies says he will leave me free. I was born to fight him. That is why I am here, to fulfill the prophecies. I'll fight him and all of you, until the last battle, until my last breath. You do not have to. Prophecy is no more than the sign of what people hope for. Fulfilling the prophecies will only bind you to a path leading to Tarman Gaden and your death. Moghedien, or even Samael can destroy your body. The great Lord of the Dark can destroy your soul. An end utter and complete. You will never be born again, no matter how long the wheel of time turns. No! For what seemed a long time, she studied him. He could almost see the scales weighing alternatives. I could take you with me, she said finally. I could have you turn to the great Lord, whatever you want or believe. There are ways. She paused, perhaps to see if her words had had any effect. Sweat rolled down his back, but he kept his face straight. He would have to do something, whether he had a chance or not. A second attempt to reach Saidin battered vainly against that invisible barrier. He let his eyes wander as if he were thinking. Kalendor was behind him, as far out of reach as the other side of the Arth Ocean. His belt knife lay on the table by the bed, together with a half-made fox he had been carving. The shapeless lumps of metal mocking him from above the fireplace. A drably clad man slipping in at the doors with a knife in his hand. The books lying everywhere. He turned back to Lanfear, tensing. You were always stubborn, she muttered. I won't take you this time. I want you to come to me of your own will, and I will have it. What is the matter? You're frowning. A man slipping in at the doors with a knife. His eyes had slid past the fellow almost without seeing. Instinctively, he pushed Lanfear out of the way and reached for the true source. The shield blocking him vanished as he touched it, and his sword was in his hands like a red-gold flame. The man rushed at him, knife held low and point up for a killing stroke. Even then, it was difficult to keep his eyes on the fellow, but Rand pivoted smoothly, and the wind blows over the wall, took off the hand holding the knife, and finished by driving through his assailant's heart. For an instant, he stared into dull eyes, lifeless while that heart still pumped, then pulled his blade free. A gray man. Rand took what felt like his first breath in hours. The corpse at his feet was messy, bleeding onto the scroll-worked carpet, but there was no difficulty in fixing an eye on him now. It was always that way with the Shadow's assassins. When they were noticed, it was usually too late. This makes no sense. You could have killed me easily. Why distract me for a gray man to sneak up on me? Lanfear was watching him warily. I make no use of the soulless. I told you there are differences among the chosen. It seems I was a day late in my judgment, but there is still time for you to come with me, to learn, to live. That sword, she all but sneered. You do not do the 10th part of what you can. Come with me and learn. Or do you mean to try to kill me now? I loosed you to defend yourself. Her voice, her stance, said she expected an attack, or at the very least was ready to counter it. But that was not what stopped him, any more than her loosing the bonds in the first place. She was one of the Forsaken. She had served evil so long, she made a black sister look like a newborn babe. Yet he saw a woman. He called himself 9 kinds of fool, but he could not do it. Maybe if she tried to kill him. Maybe. But all she did was stand there, watching, waiting. No doubt ready to do things with a power he did not even know were possible if he attempted to hold her. He had managed to block Elaine and Egwene, but that had been one of those things he did without thinking, the way of it buried somewhere in his head. He could only remember that he had done it, not how. At least he had a firm grip on Saidin. She would not surprise him that way again. The stomach-wrenching taint was nothing. Saidin was life, perhaps in more ways than one. A sudden thought boiled up in his head like a hot spring. The Aiel. Even a gray man should have found it impossible to sneak through doors watched by half a dozen Aiel. What did you do to them? His voice grated as he backed toward the doors, keeping his eyes on her. If she used the power, maybe he would have some warning. What did you do to the Aiel outside? Nothing, she replied coolly. Do not go out there. This may be only a testing to see how vulnerable you are. But even a testing may kill you if you are a fool. He flung open the left-hand door onto a scene of madness. Chapter 10. The Stone Stands. Dead Aielmen lay at Rand's feet, tangled with the bodies of 3 very ordinary men in very ordinary coats and breeches. Ordinary-looking men, except that 6 Aiel, the entire guard, had been slain. Some obviously before they knew what was happening, and each of those ordinary men had at least 2 Aiel spears through him. That was not the half of it, though. As soon as he pulled the door open, a roar of battle had washed over him. Shouting, howling, steel clashing on steel among the redstone columns. The defenders in the anteroom were fighting for their lives beneath the gilded lamps, against bulky, black-mailed shapes head and shoulders taller than they, shapes like huge men, but with heads and faces distorted by horns or feathers, by muzzle or beak where mouth and nose should be. Trollocs. They strode on paws or hooves, as often as on booted feet, cutting men down with oddly spiked axes, and hooked spears, and scythe-like swords that curved the wrong way. And with them, a Myrddraal, like a sleek-moving man with maggot-white skin in black armor, like death made bloodless flesh. Somewhere in the stone an alarm gong sounded, then stopped with lethal suddenness. Another took it up, and another, in brazen tolls. The defenders fought, and they still outnumbered the Trollocs. But there were more men down than Trollocs. Even as Rand's eyes found them, the Myrddraal tore off half the tyrant captain's face with one bare hand, while the other drove a dead black blade through a defender's throat, slipping defenders' spear thrusts like a snake. The defenders faced what they had thought were only travelers' tales to frighten children. Their nerve was frayed to snapping. One man who had lost his rimmed helmet threw down his spear and tried to flee, only to have his head split like a melon by a Trolloc's massive axe. Yet another man looked at the Myrddraal and fled screaming. The Myrddraal darted sinuously to intercept. In a moment, the humans would all be running. Fade! Rand shouted. Try me, Fade! The Myrddraal stopped as if it had never moved, its pale, eyeless face turning to him. Fear rippled through Rand at that stare, sliding over the bubble of cold calm that encased him when he held Saidin. In the Borderlands, they say, the look of the eyeless is fear. Once he had believed Fades rode shadows like horses and disappeared when they turned sideways. Those old beliefs were not so very far wrong. The Myrddraal flowed toward him, and Rand leaped the dead man in front of the doorway to meet it, his boots skidding on bloody black marble as he landed. Rally to the stone! He shouted as he leaped. The stone stands! Those were the battle cries he had heard on the night the stone had not stood. He thought he heard a vexed shout of, "Phew!" from the room he had left, but he had no time to laugh or what she might do. That skid very nearly cost him his life. His red gold blade barely turned the Myrddraal's black one as he fought for balance. Rally to the stone! The stone stands! He had to keep the defenders together or face the Myrddraal and 20 Trollocs alone. The stone stands! The stone stands! He heard someone echo him, then another. The stone stands! The Fade moved as fluidly as a serpent, the snake-like illusion heightened by the overlapping plates of black armor down its chest. Yet not even a black lance ever struck so quickly. For a time it was all Rand could do to keep its blade from his own unarmored flesh. That black metal could make wounds that festered, almost as hard to heal as the one that ached in his side now. Each time dark steel forged in Thakandar, below the slopes of Shale Ghul, met red gold power rod blade, light flashed like sheet lightning in the room, a sharp bluish white that hurt the eyes. You will die this time, the Myrddraal rasped at him in a voice like the crumbling of dead leaves. I will give your flesh to the Trollocs and take your women for my own. Rand fought as coldly as he ever had, and as desperately. The Fade knew the use of a sword. Then an instant came when he could strike a blow squarely at the sword itself, not merely divert it. With a hiss as of ice falling on molten metal, the red gold blade sheared through the black. His next blow took that eyeless head from its shoulders. The shock of hacking through bone shivered up his arms. Inky blood fountained from the stump of its neck. The thing did not fall, though. Thrashing blindly with its broken sword, the headless figure stumbled about, striking randomly at the air. As the Fade's head fell to roll across the floor, the remaining Trollocs fell too, shrieking, kicking, tearing at their heads with coarse-haired hands. It was a weakness of Myrddraal and Trollocs. Even Myrddraal did not trust Trollocs, so they often linked with them in some way Rand did not understand. It apparently ensured the Trollocs' loyalty, but those linked to Myrddraal did not survive its death long. The defenders still standing, fewer than 24, did not wait. In twos and threes, they stabbed each Trolloc repeatedly with their spears until it stopped moving. Some of them had the Myrddraal down, but it flailed wildly no matter how much they stabbed. As the Trollocs fell silent, a few surviving human wounded could be heard moaning, weeping. There were still more men littering the floor than shadow spawn. The black marble was slick with blood, almost invisible against the dark stone. Leave it, Rand told the defenders trying to finish the Myrddraal. It's dead already. Fades just don't want to admit they're dead. Lan had told him that, what seemed a long time ago. He'd had proof of it before this. See to the injured. Peering at the headless, thrashing shape, its torso a tatter of gaping wounds, they shivered and moved back, muttering about lurks. That was what they called Fades in Tyr, in tales meant for children. Some began to hunt among the downed humans for any still alive, pulling aside those who could not survive, helping those who could. All too many were left where they lay. Hasty bandages ripped from a man's own bloody shirt were the only comfort that could be offered now. They did not look so pretty as they had, these tyrants. Their no longer gleaming breast and back plates bore dents and scuffs. Blood-soaked slashes marred once fine black and gold coats and breeches. Some had no helmets. More than one leaned on his spear as if it were the only thing holding him on his feet. Perhaps it was. They breathed heavily, wild expressions on their faces, that blend of stark terror and blind numbness that afflicts men in battle. They stared at Rand uncertainly, fleeting, fearful stares, as if he might have called these creatures out of the blight himself. "Wipe those spear points," he told them. "A Thade's blood will etch steel like acid if it's left on long enough." Most moved slowly to obey, hesitantly using what was available, the coat sleeves of their own dead. The sounds of more fighting drifted through the corridors, distant shouts, the muted clash of metal. They had obeyed him twice. It was time to see if they would do more. Turning his back on them, he started across the anteroom, toward the sounds of battle. "Follow me," he ordered. He raised his fire-wrought blade to remind them of who he was, hoping the reminder did not bring a spear in his back. It had to be risked. "The stone stands! For the stone!" For a moment, his own hollow footsteps were the only sound in the columned chamber. Then boots began to follow. "For the stone!" a man shouted, and another, "For the stone and the Lord Dragon!" Others took it up. "For the stone and the Lord Dragon!" Quickening to a trot, Rand led his bloodied army of 23 deeper into the stone. Where was Lanfear, and what part had she played in this? He had little time for wondering. Dead men spotted the halls of the stone in pools of their own blood. One here, and farther on 2 or 3 more. Defenders, servants, Aiel. Women, too, linen-gowned noble and wool-clad servant alike, struck down as they fled. Trollocs did not care whom they killed. They took pleasure in it. Myrddraal were worse. Half-men gloried in pain and death. A little deeper in, the stone of Tyr boiled. Knots of Trollocs rampaged through the halls, sometimes with a Myrddraal leading, sometimes alone, battling Aiel or defenders, cutting down the unarmed, hunting for more to kill. Rand led his small force at any shadow spawn they found, his sword slicing coarse flesh and black mail with equal ease. Only the Aiel faced a Fade without flinching. The Aiel and Rand. He passed up Trollocs to reach Fades. Sometimes the Myrddraal took a dozen or 2 Trollocs with it in dying, sometimes none. Some of his defenders fell and did not rise, but Aiel joined them, nearly doubling their number. Groups of men broke off in furious battles that drifted away in shouts and clattered like a forge gone mad. Other men fell in behind Rand, broke away, were replaced, till none of those who had started with him remained. Sometimes he fought alone or ran down a hallway, empty save for himself and the dead, following the sounds of distant combat. Once, with 2 defenders, in a colonnade looking down into a long chamber with many doorways, he saw Moraine and Lan, surrounded by Trollocs. The Aes Sedai stood, head high like some storied queen of battles, and bestial shapes burst into flame around her, but only to be replaced by more, dashing in through this door or that, 6 or 8 at a time. Lan's sword accounted for those who escaped Moraine's fire. The warder had blood on both sides of his face, yet he flowed through the forms as coolly as if practicing before a mirror. Then a wolf-snouted Trolloc thrust a tyrant spear toward Moraine's back. Lan whirled as though he had eyes in the back of his head, taking off the Trolloc's leg at the knee. The Trolloc fell, howling, yet still managed to thrust a spear point at Lan, just as another clubbed the warder awkwardly with the flat of its axe, buckling his knees. Rand could do nothing, for at that moment 5 Trollocs fell upon him and his 2 companions, all snouts and boar's tusks and ram's horns, pushing the humans out of the colonnade by the sheer weight of their rush. 5 Trollocs should have been able to kill 3 men without much difficulty, except that one of the men was Rand, with a sword that treated their mail like cloth. One of the defenders died, and the other vanished, chasing after a wounded Trolloc, the lone survivor of the 5. When Rand hurried back to the colonnade, there was a smell of burned meat from the chamber below, and great burned bodies on its floor, but no sign of Moraine or Lan. That was the way of the contest for the stone, or the contest for Rand's life. Battles sprang up and drifted away from where they began, or died when one side fell. Not only did men fight Trollocs in Myrddraal, men fought men. There were dark friends siding the shadow spawn, roughly dressed fellows who looked like former soldiers and tavern brawlers. They seemed as fearful of the Trollocs as the Tyrants did, but they killed as indiscriminately where they could. Twice Rand actually saw Trollocs battling Trollocs. He could only assume the Myrddraal had lost control of them and their bloodlust had taken over. If they wanted to slay each other, he left them to it. Then, alone once more and seeking, he trotted round a corner and right into 3 Trollocs, each twice as wide as he and nearly half again as tall. One of them, with an eagle's hooked beak thrusting out of an otherwise human face, was hacking an arm from the corpse of a Tyrant noblewoman, while the other 2 watched eagerly, licking their snouts. Trollocs ate anything so long as it was meat. It was an even chance whether he was more surprised or they were, but he was the first to recover. The one with the eagle's beak went down, male and belly alike opened across. The sword form called Lizard in the Thornbush should have done for the other 2, but that first fallen Trolloc, thrashing still, half-kicked his foot out from under him, and he staggered, his blade only scoring a slice along his target's mail, right into the path of the second Trolloc as it fell, Wolf's muzzle snapping at nothing. It crushed him to the stone tiles beneath its bulk, trapping sword arm and sword alike. The one still standing raised its spiked axe, coming as close to a smile as a boar's snout and tusks would allow. Rand struggled to move, to breathe. A scythe-curved sword split the boar's snout to the neck. Wrenching its blade free, a 4th Trolloc bared goat teeth at him in a snarl, ears twitching beside its horns. Then it darted away, sharp hooves clicking on the floor tiles. Rand heaved himself out from under the dead weight of the Trolloc, half stunned. A Trolloc saved me. A Trolloc. Trolloc blood was all over him, thick and dark. Far down the hallway, in the opposite direction from where the goat-horned Trolloc had fled, blue-white flashed as 2 Myrddraal moved into view, fighting each other in an almost boneless blur of continuous motion. One forced the other into a crossing corridor, and the flashing light faded from sight. I'm mad. That's what it is. I'm mad. And this is all some crazed dream. You risk everything, rushing about wildly with that sword. Rand turned to face Lanfear. She had put on the appearance of a girl again, no older than he, perhaps younger. She lifted her white skirts to step over the Tyrant lady's torn body. For all the emotion on her face, it might as well have been a log. You build a hut of twigs, she went on, when you could have marble palaces for the snap of your fingers. You could have had their lives and such souls as Trollocs possess with little effort, and instead they nearly killed you. You must learn. Join with me. Was this your doing? He demanded. That Trolloc saving me. Those Myrddraal, was it? She considered him a moment before giving a slight, regretful shake of her head. If I take credit, you'll expect it again, and that could be deadly. None of the others is really certain where I stand, and I like it that way. You can expect no open aid from me. Expect your aid, he growled. You want me to turn to the shadow? You can't make me forget what you are with soft words. He channeled, and she slammed against a wall hanging, hard enough to make her grunt. He held her there, spread-eagled over a woven hunting scene, feet off the ground and snowy gown spread out and flattened. How had you blocked Egwene in a lane? He had to remember. Suddenly, he flew across the hallway to crash into the wall opposite Lanfear, pressed there like an insect by something that barely allowed him to breathe. Lanfear appeared to have no trouble breathing. Whatever you can do, Lews Therin, I can do, and better. Pinned against the wall as she was, she seemed unperturbed. The din of fighting surged up somewhere nearby, then faded as the battle moved away. You have used the smallest fraction of what you are capable of, and walk away from what would allow you to crush all who come against you. Where is Kalandor, Lews Therin? Still up in your bedchamber like some useless ornament? Do you think yours is the only hand that can wield it, now that you have drawn it free? If Samael is here, he will take it and use it against you. Even Moghedien would take it to deny you its use. She could gain much by trading it to any male chosen. He struggled against whatever held him. Nothing moved but his head, flung from side to side. Kalandor in the hands of a male Forsaken. The thought drove him half mad with fear and frustration. He channeled, tried to pry at what held him, but there might as well have been nothing to pry. And then abruptly it was gone. He lurched away from the wall, still fighting, before he realized he was free. And from nothing he had done. He looked at Lanfear. She still hung there, as complacently as if taking the air on a stream side. She was trying to lull him, to gull him into softening toward her. He hesitated over the floes holding her. If he tied them off and left her, she might tear half the stone down trying to get free. If a passing Trolloc did not kill her, thinking she was one of the stone's folk. That should not have troubled him, not the death of a Forsaken, but the thought of leaving a woman, or anyone helpless for Trollocs, repelled him. A glance at her unruffled composure rid him of that thought. No one, nothing in the stone would harm her as long as she could channel. If he could find Moraine to block her. Once more Lanfear took the decision from him. The impact of severed floes jolted him, and she dropped lightly to the floor. He stared as she stepped away from the wall, calmly brushing her skirts. "You can't do that," he gasped foolishly, and she smiled. "I do not have to see a flow to unravel it, if I know what it is and where. You see, you have much to learn. I like you like this. You were always too stiff-necked and sure of yourself for comfort. It was always better when you were a bit uncertain of your footing. Are you forgetting Callandor, then?" Still he hesitated. One of the Forsaken stood there, and there was absolutely nothing he could do. Turning, he ran for Callandor. Her laughter seemed to follow him. This time he did not turn aside to fight Trollocs or Myrddraal, did not slow his wild climb through the stone unless they got in his way. Then his sword, carved of fire, sliced a way through for him. He saw Perrin and Faile, he with axe in hand, she guarding his back with her knives. The Trollocs seemed as reluctant to face Perrin's yellow-eyed stare as his axe blade. Brand left them behind without a second look. If one of the Forsaken took Callandor, none of them would live to see the sunrise. Breathless, he scrambled through the columned anteroom, leaping the dead still lying there, defenders and Trollocs alike, in his haste to reach Callandor. He flung open both doors. The sword that is not a sword sat on its gilded and gem-set stand, shining with the light of the setting sun, waiting for him. Now that he had it in sight, safe, he was almost loath to touch it. Once, he had used Callandor as it was truly meant to be used. Only once. He knew what awaited him when he took it up again, used it to draw on the true swords far beyond what any human could hold unaided. Letting go the red gold blade seemed more than he could do. When it vanished, he almost called it back. Feet dragging, he skirted the corpse of the gray man and put his hand slowly on Callandor's hilt. It was cold, like crystal long in the dark, but it did not feel so smooth that it would slip in the hand. Something made him look up. A Fade stood in the doorway, hesitating, its pale-faced, eyeless gaze on Callandor. Rand pulled at Saidin, through Callandor. The sword that is not a sword blazed in his hands, as if he held noonday. The power filled him, hammering down like solid thunder. The taint rushed through him in a flood of blackness. Molten rock pulsed along his veins. The cold inside him could have frozen the sun. He had to use it or burst like a rotted melon. The Myrddraal turned to flee, and suddenly black clothes and armor crumpled to the floor, leaving oily motes floating in the air. He was not even aware he had channeled until it was done. He could not have said what he had done if his life had depended on it. But nothing could threaten his life while he held Callandor. The power throbbed in him like the heartbeat of the world. With Callandor in his hands, he could do anything. The power hammered at him, a hammer to crack mountains. A channeled thread whisked the Myrddraal's drifting remains out into the anteroom, and its clothes and armor too. A trickled flow incinerated both. He strode out to hunt those who had come hunting him. Some of them had come as far as the anteroom. Another Fade and a huddle of cowering Trollocs stood before the columns at the far side, staring at ash that sifted out in the air, the last fragments of the Myrddraal and all its guard. At the sight of...
Alright, everyone, probably gonna call it into this life for tonight. Be back on tomorrow. If I don't do some gameplay tomorrow. But I want to thank everyone who keeps coming back and chilling with me. Definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.